Welcome to another episode of Show and Tell Books. I'm Amber,
And I'm Chantel.
and today we're talking about the American Royals series by Katharine McGee.
This is one of my absolute favorite YA series to the point where it's like one of my go-to recommendations for just about everyone.
So I did a quick little post about it on TikTok, and someone was like, I've been on the fence. And I said, if you like celebrity gossip or reality TV shows, like The Bachelor feel, you would like this book. I can't really think of other books besides The Selection that it's like, though.
Everyone already says The Selection is like The Bachelor, but better. And I would say, kind of like what you were thinking, the like trashy reality TV side of it, that is very much American Royals. So basically, if Washington had actually accepted becoming king of America and not being a president, his descendants nowadays and their battle with being the first queen and what the royals and their relationship with the public is in modern day America and its interaction with a lot of other countries. And it's just clever and ingenious because while I think we've all kind of been like, well, what if? Never would have thought of putting a book into that and discussing the nuances of us having our own monarchy.
So I fully admit the only reason I read this series is because you recommended it to me last year. And the only reason I stuck with it was because of the political science loving part of me was like, oh, it's an interesting premise to say Washington became a king instead of a president. And how would that impact other monarchies? Because in this alternate reality the author created, all of the other monarchies still exist. And I
I
thought
thought that was
it was very interesting.
interesting. Yeah, it's also like, quite frankly, kind of what I think would have happened had the US not become a democracy. Democracy wouldn't really exist nowadays. And so I thought it was very appropriate for the alternate reality that she had created. Like, she did really well to set up a world that still feels just like our America, but different enough that you're like, oh, this actually probably is how it would have gone. How she even deals with slavery injustices that happened when America was first founded. She actually has that as parts of it and addressing how the America of her books confronts racial inequality and prejudices and biases that are still very prevalent in our America today. So it's just really cool how she made it relatable to all of us who are reading it while also making it a completely alternate reality that kind of makes me wish that we had a monarchy, to be honest.
Well, and it was also interesting because she kept the three branches of US government. So the executive branch became the monarchy, but there was still the judicial and legislative branches acting as checks and balances. And you kind of get a hint of it throughout the series. So she doesn't fully flesh out this political system, but she offered juxtaposition that is digestible for a young adult audience. And that as like an adult reading it, I thought was super interesting. So something I thought was really interesting is you've talked about in a lot of the videos about kind of the different eras that literature goes through, right? And like we had the dystopian era in the 2010s. And I think the American Royal series is a great example of the multi-point of view era that we are in now, where especially in things that are romance adjacent, we have dual point of view or multi point of view. And the author took it a step further in having 4 point of views throughout this series. And I loved the way she did it, but it can make it complicated for people to keep track of who these characters are and why we care about them. So let's talk about the 4 main women. They're all strong women, independent, intelligent, strong-willed. So they have all of these like role model-esque characteristics that kind of unite them, but that also acts as kind of a deterrence to their friendships in some ways. So the 4 main females, you have Princess Beatrice, Princess Samantha, Daphne, and then Nina.
Nina. Like Amber said, Beatrice, she's the eldest. She's therefore the heir to the throne. She's got 2 younger siblings. They're both twins. So that's Sam and that's Jefferson. Sam's best friend is Nina. They've been best friends since they were little. Jefferson is currently dating and throughout the series, Daphne. And his best friend is also named Ethan. So those are some of the characters.
So Connor
That's
is
true.
Beatrice guard, royal security agent.
And then another major character is Teddy. And he is kind of Beatrice's intended, for lack of a better word. And then another character that also gets thrown in is Marshall, who gets introduced in the first book but becomes major players throughout the rest of the series. So it's kind of crazy, kind of complicated, and we didn't even go into all of the like how they're all completely interconnected because there's a lot of nuances to that that are fleshed out and developed throughout the entire series. But I just think it's so fascinating that these, what is that, like 9 characters are written in such a way that at the beginning you're like, okay, what am I signing up for? And then as you read each book, they got better and you learned more about them, about what makes them tick and why in book 1 they made certain decisions and how that actually is completely on brand with who they are at their core. And I felt like they were real people. Let's talk about tropes. Okay. Because like we mentioned, this has everything. I can't even do like book by book because they all just flow so seamlessly. So there's a lot of different plots. So Princess Bodyguard,
love triangle, best friend's brother, cheating, pregnancy, fake dating, marriage of convenience, secret identity,
enemies to lovers in a way,
amnesia, rags to riches, and riches to rags.
There is second chance romance in there.
I think that covers it.
So there is a forced proximity in there.
And one bed. It literally has all of them, guys. She did an excellent job of utilizing these tropes for the story. So instead of marketing the book as, oh, if you like reading this trope, read this book, they were actually used as plot devices rather than
something to check off your bingo card.
Yes. You see how they build on each other. So because we acted this way, it resulted in this, and therefore we had to come to this conclusion. I also was going to say I thought it was very interesting how there were breadcrumbs throughout this series that led you to the conclusion, but I felt like it was one where you kind of knew how things were going to come to an end, but the way she got you there was very elegant. I kind of wish we had the male POV. I think it's powerful that she told it from these women. However, like there are just some parts that I'm like, Ethan's point of view would be very interesting. Teddy's point of view would be very interesting. Marshall's as well. Like you get hints of it in their interactions, but I feel like those 3 in particular, I would want to read their point of views.
I loved how realistic the relationships were because a lot of book talk books, they just kind of breeze over the complications that come with class differences or racial differences or cultural differences that happen, right? And this book doesn't. Like Beatrice at some point in the series kind of just goes like, is this worth it? Like, how are we sure that this is going to end happily ever after? How are we sure we won't fight about this issue? And her love interest goes, we won't. Like, quite frankly, you can't promise that everything's going to work out happily ever after. Like we will fight. We will disagree on certain things, but we have to just commit to putting us as a unit above all of that. And I loved that because that's so realistic and how couples should act.
I feel like 2 major themes in this book is power dynamics and grief. You have the 3 siblings grieving very deeply for their father and how that influences their relationships, not only with each other, but with their romantic partners. And then the power dynamics between the siblings and their romantic partners, because Beatrice, especially going in as the reigning monarch, has that issue with the relationship she has formed. But you also see it in Jefferson and Daphne's, as well as Sam and Marshall. Like you said, it's that how much can you ask someone to sacrifice? What can you truly expect from them if you love each other? What can you ask?
Amber did like a short TikTok on this, and I do just want to like clarify our thoughts on order in which you should read the books. So we would recommend reading first American Royal, second Majesty, which is book 2, third reading Rivals, which is book 3, then reading the novella, which is Inheritance, and then book 4, which is Reign. Wouldn't you agree?
I would totally agree, especially because you have suspense that's built through the first 3 books. And if you read Inheritance first, that's going to ruin the plot and suspense development that has happened in those 3 books, in my opinion. It offers more information for the 4th book.
So, I mean, I guess maybe if you want spoilers, then read the novella first and then read the rest of the series. But we highly recommend reading the first 3, then the novella, then the last book.
I think it's a great segue into the character development that takes place, because I feel like Inheritance really gives you that jumping off, like, oh, this is where it started. This is where these interactions and behaviors first existed. And you see it in the first novel as well, but I feel like Inheritance kind of is that wake-up call after the 3rd book where you're like, oh, I think they've grown, I think they've developed, they're turning a new leaf in some of these cases, trying to change their behaviors as they get older. And Inheritance is kind of that reality check in some ways of like, it's a long way to go.
I also really liked how there's essentially like a one-word characteristic that each character is. Beatrice is perfectionistic or a perfectionist. Sam is spoiled.
Just a random tie-in. If you're familiar with The Crown and the story of Queen Elizabeth and her sister Margaret, you get that dynamic very much between Beatrice and Sam. And so it's how people view Queen Elizabeth and how they view Princess Margaret is very much how Beatrice and Sam are written in the first book, I feel like.
Daphne.
Manipulative.
And Nina is kind of just
nerdy best friend.
Vanilla,
yes.
That just kind of ties in with the character development because, like, for example, everyone hates Daphne in book 1. She's horrible. She really is. And then as you're reading the books, it's really funny because you start to realize, like, she's actually not. She's a product of her environment, which granted, she also makes a lot of decisions and you're just like, Daphne, what the heck are you doing? Like, you did so well. And then, like, the cliffhanger at the end of 3, which just telling you now, there's so many parts of it that I was like, what is going on? Why are you like all regressing?
I do think it's interesting because I remember reading book 3 last year and telling you I hate Daphne. I think I said she was
because of the trope she uses in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I said she's an irredeemable character in my mind. And you were like, she's my favorite character. So I think that also just goes to show like Katharine McGee's strength as a writer is showcased in how people connect to these characters, and you connect to these characters on a very deep level and you root for them throughout this story. I actually do want to spend a few minutes on the ending, and I'm going to attempt to do it without spoilers. I was unsatisfied with the ending overall, and the epilogues I felt fluctuate between if I'm going to read an epilogue or not. And most of the time it's like, oh, I should have just put the book down before I read the epilogue, because I feel like authors tend to try to wrap things up and put a nice little bow on them, and they don't always do it in a way that feels realistic. I think Katharine McGee actually did provide a realistic epilogue, but I felt like it regressed some of the characters at the same time. Like, she might have left the door open for another book to be written, and I don't want to read it if it's on that trajectory. Let's hit the spice meter. It is a young adult. I would classify it as a young adult romance. It's closed door, fade to black. So overall, I think I rated the series at about a 3.5 stars. Some of the books were a little bit higher. Some of them were lower.
That is so funny. I am pretty sure I'm at like a 4-star on all of them. It's a book we highly recommend. Maybe I highly recommend it. Maybe Amber just recommends it, but I think it's fun.
It is a fun, and it's a quick read.
I do have to ask one thing. Would you prefer to see this in a TV series or a movie adaptation?
TV series.
I agree. I think just based off of how it's written, that's the best. Let us know in a comment your like ideal casting, because there were certain things we learned characteristics wise of the characters in the fourth book that we had not put together in the first book. So we're now rearranging our ideal character list and how they look, because the covers apparently do not actually describe the characters themselves. We'll see you guys next time.
Yep. Thanks for joining.